Have you ever sat in silence, staring at your phone, waiting for a message that never came? Not out of desperation, but confusion. One day everything felt connected, the laughter, the conversations, the way she looked at you like you mattered. And then, like someone flipped a switch, she became distant, cold, silent. And nobody tells you what to do when silence hurts more than words ever could. They say just move on. But how do you move on when your mind replays every moment like it's trying to find the one thing you missed? Let me ask you something. What if the silence wasn't rejection? What if it was a test not of your love, but of your self-respect? What if the real question isn't how do I win her back, but instead how do I not lose myself trying? If you've ever felt that ache, that quiet grief of someone drifting away, this video is for you. But I'm not here to give you tricks to get her attention. I'm here to remind you of something far more powerful, that your silence can speak louder than your desperation. That walking away isn't weakness, it's clarity. And that the man who doesn't chase becomes the man who is remembered. So sit back, not to escape the pain, but to understand it. Because once you see what's really happening beneath her silence and beneath yours, you'll realize this isn't the end of something. It's the beginning of you. Let's begin. It usually starts with something small. She takes longer to reply. Her texts go from paragraphs to a few words, and suddenly the little blue dot means more to you than it should. You tell yourself it's nothing, she's probably just busy. But your hand keeps reaching for your phone. You check her story. You wonder who that guy in the background was. You replay the last conversation looking for clues. And here's the truth most men don't want to admit. You're not addicted to her. You're addicted to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she still cares. This is what psychologists call a dopamine loop. Every ping, every notification, every seen but not replied triggers a spike, just like pulling the lever on a slot machine. You don't need the win. You just need the chance of one. And it's that possibility that keeps you checking, waiting, obsessing. I had a friend, let's call him Jake. Strong guy, confident. But after his girlfriend started pulling away, he found himself refreshing her page at 2 a.m., hoping for something. Anything, he said. I don't even want her back. I just want to know I mattered. And that's what makes this so dangerous. It's not about the relationship anymore. It's about your identity, your worth, your emotional survival. The moment you hand over your peace to a notification is the moment you stop being free. You become a slave to absence, to the idea that someone else's attention is your validation. But let me tell you something, no text, no story, no like, will ever give you the closure you're looking for. Because closure doesn't come from her. It comes from you deciding you're done needing permission to move on. Here's the lesson. The first step to becoming stronger is not reacting faster, it's disconnecting smarter. Turn off the story notifications, mute the thread. Breathe. Not because you're punishing her, but because you're finally choosing you. Because the moment you stop checking your phone every 5 minutes is the moment she starts wondering why you don't anymore. And that's when something else begins, something we'll talk about next. Because now, she's about to test you. You thought things were going well. The conversations flowed, the chemistry was there, and her smile had that way of lighting you up inside. And then, without warning, it shifted. Her replies got shorter, plans became maybe next week. She still watches your stories, maybe even likes a post or two, but emotionally, she's already half a room away. And you're left wondering, did I say something wrong? Is she losing interest? But maybe what's happening isn't rejection. Maybe it's a test. In the world of modern dating, especially for men, there's an invisible layer no one tells you about. It's called emotional probing. It's subtle, sometimes unconscious, but real. She pulls back slightly, just to see what you'll do. Will you panic? Will you chase? Will you double text, over-explain, or ask what's wrong when she hasn't asked for that conversation? Many women, even without realizing it, are searching for one thing: emotional stability. They want to know, if I go quiet, will he fall apart? If I disappear for a day, will he beg for attention? If I test the waters, will he drown? I remember a guy named Liam. Smart, kind, deeply invested. He met a girl who matched his energy for weeks. Then suddenly she slowed down. She stopped initiating. And Liam, thinking he had to save the connection, poured in more. Long messages, unexpected flowers, open confessions. What did she do? She pulled back even more. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because she saw something he didn't. He needed her to feel okay about himself. That's when respect quietly begins to slip away. You see, testing isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's just a reflection of uncertainty. She's not sure about you, so she watches how you handle space. And that moment right there is your window of truth. Here's the lesson: you don't pass the test by explaining yourself, you pass it by not needing to. By staying grounded, unshaken, and focused on your own path. Because a man who stays still in the middle of emotional noise, that's a man she remembers. That's a man who earns her respect, not her curiosity. And if you can do that, stay centered when the energy shifts, you gain something even more valuable than her attention, her uncertainty. And that's where we're heading next. Because the moment she starts questioning what you're thinking is the moment you've already taken back control. There's a quiet difference between power and control, but it changes everything. Most men confuse the two. They think having power means making her stay, convincing her to text back, or proving they're worth it. But the truth is, that's not power. That's control. And control, no matter how well dressed, is always driven by fear. Real power, it's the ability to remain calm in uncertainty, to stay rooted in who you are, even when the other person begins to drift. It's not reactive, it's not loud. It's presence without pressure. That's where Stoicism comes in, not as a cold, emotionless shell, but as a compass. Epictetus once said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond." And nowhere is that more true than in love, loss, and silence. I once spoke to a man named Eric. He had just gone through a confusing breakup. No closure, no final words, just a slow fade into silence. Instead of chasing, he did something else. He sat with the discomfort, he read, he journaled. He even started therapy, not to fix what happened, but to understand himself better. And the most powerful thing, he never once tried to force her back. No angry messages, no dramatic exits. He didn't need to prove anything to her, because he had already started proving it to himself. That's power. Control says she needs to see my value. Power says I know my value whether she sees it or not. Control wants to manipulate timing. Power trusts in timing, and the world can feel the difference. Here's the lesson. When you let go of control, you open the door to something stronger: emotional sovereignty. The ability to lead your life without being held hostage by what someone else does or doesn't do. And strangely enough, that's what makes people curious again, because the one who doesn't chase is often the one they remember most. Now imagine this: she pulls away, expecting the usual pattern. But instead of chasing, you remain still. You're not cold, you're not pretending, you're just grounded. That shift doesn't just confuse her, it unsettles her expectations. It introduces something powerful into the space between you, doubt. And that is exactly what we're going to explore next. It usually happens when you've just started to feel okay again. You're not over her, not completely, but you've stopped checking her profile every hour. You've begun sleeping better. The ache is quieter. Then, out of nowhere, "Hey, just saw something that reminded me of you." Or, "Hope you're doing well." And just like that, your heart skips. Your brain kicks into overdrive. Is this it? Is she coming back? But hold on. Before you reply, before you reopen that door, you need to know this: breadcrumbs are not apologies. They're not invitations. They're traps. This behavior, often called breadcrumbing, is when someone drops tiny signs of attention without any real intention of reconnecting. A like here, a vague message there, a subtle comment meant to stir something, but never to build something. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's just ego. She wants to see if she still has a place in your mind. Other times it's boredom, insecurity, or her own unresolved emotions. But here's the painful part. The moment you respond too quickly, too warmly, too eagerly, she pulls away again. Why? Because it was never about you. It was about her comfort. I once knew a guy named Sean. After months of silence, his ex sent him a picture of an old cafe they used to go to. He lit up. He replied within seconds. 2 messages, a voice note, and one "I miss that too." Later, she vanished. No response, nothing. He was left feeling emptier than before. Why does this happen? Because she wasn't checking in, she was checking control. And when she found it, she left again. Not to hurt you, but to reassure herself. Here's the lesson: silence isn't just protection, it's clarity. If someone wants to return, they won't send smoke signals. They'll knock on your door, clearly, consistently, and courageously. Anything less is just noise. So when those breadcrumbs come, pause. Ask yourself, is this real? Or is this just bait for my attention? Because the man who can sit with curiosity without needing answers, that's a man who's no longer controlled by the game. And guess what happens when you don't respond? When you leave that message on read? When your silence speaks louder than your old need for closure? She begins to wonder. And that wonder, that uncertainty, is the beginning of the power shift we'll talk about next. There's something oddly powerful about silence, not the kind filled with resentment or games, but the kind that's rooted in peace, in self-respect, in the quiet decision to not engage with energy that doesn't deserve a reaction. At first, when you stop reaching out, she might not notice. A few days go by, nothing. She continues her life, posts a few stories, maybe even smiles wider in her photos. But slowly, a subtle shift begins. Because silence, real grounded silence, isn't just absence, it's a mirror. And the moment you stop reacting, you stop giving her the story she expected. No double texts, no "are you okay?" no chasing, just stillness. Now she's left to sit with herself, with her choices, with the growing question, why hasn't he tried to reach out? That's when the reflection starts. Because when someone expects you to need them, and you don't, it unsettles them. Not in a spiteful way, but in a way that forces introspection. I remember talking to a woman once, let's call her Ava. She said, "I used to think I could always come back, until the day he didn't reply, not with anger, not with sarcasm, just nothing. That silence hit harder than any fight we ever had." That's the mirror effect. Your stillness becomes her echo chamber, and if there's any genuine care, it will rise to the surface, not through vague texts or breadcrumbing, but through discomfort, through self-awareness. But here's the part that matters most. This effect only works if your silence is authentic, if it's not a game, if you're not secretly hoping she texts, if you're genuinely choosing peace over performance. Here's the lesson. When you stop feeding the fire, the smoke clears. And when the smoke clears, the truth shows up. Sometimes that truth is her realizing she misjudged you. Sometimes it's her accepting the loss. But either way, you're not waiting. You're observing. You're becoming. Because when a man no longer needs to be seen to know his worth, he becomes unforgettable. And now that she's feeling that shift, that doubt, something deeper is starting to unfold. The emotional grip she once had, it's slipping. And in the next part, we'll talk about why silence isn't just power. It's the beginning of something even stronger, your frame. There's a quiet strength in the man who doesn't chase, not because he doesn't care, but because he knows who he is. This isn't about pretending. It's not about ignoring her to win. It's about something deeper, something many men never learn growing up. Your value isn't proven by pursuit. It's revealed through presence. In psychology, there's something called the masculine frame. It's not about dominance or control. It's about emotional gravity. It's the invisible force that says, I don't need to prove myself to be grounded. I am already centered. You don't earn this by being louder. You earn it by being still. I once met a man named Jordan. He had just come out of a relationship where he gave everything: time, effort, endless emotional reassurance. And yet nothing he did seemed enough. The more he gave, the more she pulled away. until one day he stopped, not out of spite, but because he realized something. He had been trying to prove a value he already had. So he stopped over-explaining. He stopped reacting to every cold message or delayed response, and something shifted in him first and then in her. Because when a man holds his frame, when he refuses to be pulled off center by chaos, the world around him begins to notice. Women feel it. Friends respect it. Opportunities come toward it. The world moves around the stillness of a man who doesn't chase, because that stillness communicates self-trust. Here's the hard truth. When you make her the center of your attention, you quietly place yourself beneath her. But when you make your path the center, your purpose, your growth, your values, you naturally become the gravity people orbit. Here's the lesson. Your frame is not what you project. It's what you protect. You don't need to explain your silence. You don't need to justify your distance. Your calm is your clarity. And once she senses that, once she feels that she can't sway you like before, her behavior changes. Maybe not immediately, but doubt creeps in. And it's in that space of doubt, of unfamiliar stillness, that something unexpected begins to form in her mind. What if I was wrong about him? Next, we'll go deeper into that shift, into the moment where the person who once pulled away starts to quietly question if they ever really understood your worth at all. When someone pulls away, especially someone you cared deeply for, it's easy to believe they were the only one who got you. That no one else will ever look at you the way she did, or laugh at your dumb jokes, or understand your silence like she could. And in that moment, that soft, vulnerable space, you begin to write a dangerous story in your head. She was the one. The only one. But here's what's really happening. You're not mourning a person. You're mourning the idea of scarcity, the illusion that love like that won't ever come again. That connection is rare. That somehow, by losing her, you've lost your only chance at something beautiful. I want to pause here and remind you of something tender, yet powerful. Love isn't rare, but self-worth in the face of loss is. This belief that she's irreplaceable often stems from the timing of the relationship. Maybe she came into your life when you were healing. Maybe she saw a side of you no one else did. Maybe you let her into places you never showed anyone. And so now your mind attaches meaning. It rewrites the past with rose-colored edits. You overlook the confusion, the mixed signals, the late replies. You highlight the warmth, the laughter, the connection. This is human. It's your brain trying to protect you from pain by turning her into a symbol, not just a person. I remember a man named Travis. After a difficult breakup, he told me, "She's the only woman who's ever made me feel seen." But as we talked more, he realized something. She wasn't the only one, she was just the first one he allowed to see him. And that's the key. You gave her access. You opened up. You created the connection through vulnerability, not her, you. Here's the lesson. She wasn't the source of something magical. She was a mirror reflecting what already lived in you. And if it came once, it can come again, deeper, richer, more aligned. But only if you stop clinging to the story that she was it. The world is not short on love. It's short on people who believe they're worthy of it after loss. And the moment you step out of that scarcity mindset, you begin to reclaim your openness. Not in desperation, but in quiet confidence. And this confidence, this return to wholeness, is exactly what we'll explore next. Because learning to let go isn't about forgetting her. It's about remembering you. After heartbreak, a lot of men swing hard in the other direction. They say things like, "I don't care anymore, she meant nothing," or "I'm done with love." It sounds strong. It looks like detachment. But more often than not, it's disconnection in disguise. There's a difference. Detachment is calm. Disconnection is cold. Detachment says, "I love you, but I no longer need you to be okay." Disconnection says, "I'll shut down so I never feel this again." And while both may look the same on the outside, only one actually leads to healing. Real detachment is a process of acceptance, not avoidance. It's when you no longer feel the urge to control the outcome, when you stop rehearsing conversations in your head or hoping your silence will bring her back. It's when you're okay, even if she never reaches out again. I remember a guy named Marcus. He told me after she left, I acted like nothing touched me, started dating right away, kept busy, laughed louder, but deep down I was just tired of pretending I didn't care. It wasn't until months later, sitting alone with his thoughts, no music, no distractions, that he realized he hadn't healed. He had just disconnected. So he started over, this time with honesty. He let himself miss her without judgment. He wrote letters he never sent. He meditated on the difference between loneliness and solitude, and slowly the bitterness faded, not because he forced it to go away, but because he faced it, gently. Here's the lesson: you don't have to become hard to become whole. You don't have to shut love out to protect your peace. You simply have to build a relationship with yourself that's deeper than any fear of loss. Detachment isn't an armor, it's awareness. It's being able to sit in the quiet and say, I feel the absence, but I don't chase it, I let it pass. And when you reach that place where your heart stays open, but your worth isn't negotiable, you stop attracting chaos. You stop falling for breadcrumbs. You stop losing yourself in people who only want half of you. Because now you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. And from here, something powerful happens. The voices around you, friends, social media, even your own past, will start telling you what to do next. But not all advice is worth following. Next, we'll talk about one of the most dangerous traps: bad advice from people who love you, but don't understand your journey. When your heart breaks, people rush in with advice. They mean well, truly. They want to help you feel strong again, to see you smile, to remind you that you're not alone. But sometimes, without realizing it, they make the pain louder. You've heard it. Post a story with another girl. Let her know you're doing fine. Don't let her think she won. Make her jealous. That'll teach her. And at first, it feels empowering. You follow the script. You hit the gym harder. You upload photos that scream, I'm unbothered. You throw in a cryptic quote about loyalty or betrayal. But when the screen goes dark and the notifications fade, you're still there, sitting with a version of yourself you no longer recognize. Because here's the truth. Performing strength is not the same as being strong. There's a difference between moving on and trying to prove you did. I once knew a man named Elias. After a tough breakup, his friends rallied around him. They took him out every weekend, pushed him to get back out there, and told him to never let her see him hurt. He followed every word, until one night, after another party and another meaningless conversation, he came home, looked in the mirror, and said, I don't even know who I'm pretending to be anymore. His healing began the moment he stopped trying to win the breakup and started asking deeper questions. What did I learn? What do I need to unlearn? What kind of love do I deserve moving forward? You see, friends often want to lift you out of your sadness, but sometimes they end up tossing you into distraction instead of direction. Here's the lesson: be careful who you let shape your healing. Not everyone has walked through fire without becoming bitter. Not everyone has sat with silence without losing themselves in the noise. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's sitting alone in your car at night, breathing through the ache and realizing you're okay. So take their love, but not always their methods. You don't need to prove your worth by pretending you've moved on. You prove it by building something better from the inside out. And when you do that, when you heal honestly, you change not just your past, but every relationship you'll have after this. Which brings us to something most men overlook. How you handle rejection now will shape the love you accept and expect in the future. Rejection hurts, there's no way around it. Whether it's silent or brutal, expected or blindsiding, it leaves a mark. But here's the thing we don't talk about enough. It also leaves instructions. Instructions you carry into every relationship after. See, how you handle rejection today becomes the blueprint for how you love tomorrow. Not just how you love others, but how you love yourself. Because every breakup writes a story in your mind: I wasn't enough. They always leave. I have to give more next time to keep someone. But what if that story isn't true? What if rejection doesn't mean you were too little, but simply that the connection had reached its purpose? I knew a guy once, his name was Darren. Smart, kind, a deeply loyal partner. He fell hard for someone who couldn't match his depth. And when she left without warning, his world fell apart. At first, he did what most of us do. He blamed himself, replayed every moment, every word, wondered if he was too soft, too expressive, too much. So in his next relationship, he overcorrected, he held back, never showed too much emotion, never let himself be fully seen. And that relationship, it crumbled too. Not because he was wrong again, but because he was now hiding the best parts of himself. All because of one moment of pain that went unprocessed. That's the quiet cost of rejection. If you don't sit with it, you carry it. And it becomes your new standard. Here's the truth most men don't hear enough: rejection isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of compatibility. The job of healing isn't to prove them wrong. It's to prove to yourself that one person's choice doesn't define your identity. Here's the lesson: use this moment to upgrade your internal narrative. To say, this hurt me, but it didn't break me. To learn where you gave too much, where you ignored red flags, where you forgot to check in with your own needs. Because the man who learns from rejection doesn't harden, he refines. And it's that kind of man, one who chooses growth over ego, who walks into his next relationship without fear, without games, without a mask. Now that we've cleared the fog of rejection, it's time to face something even more dangerous: the silent, secret hope that she'll one day regret losing you. Let's talk about that next. There's a quiet little hope that often lingers after heartbreak. It doesn't scream. It doesn't show up in conversations with friends. It hides in your chest, in the silence between songs, in the spaces where her name used to live. It's the thought one day she'll realize what she lost. At first, it feels harmless, even motivating. You hit the gym harder, dress better, make moves in your career, not entirely for you, but with a whisper in the back of your mind: she'll see. She'll wish she stayed. But here's what makes that hope dangerous: it looks like progress, but it's still chained to the past. Because when your healing depends on her regret, you're still not free. You're still writing your next chapter with her name on the margins. I met a guy named Aaron who fell into this trap. After his breakup, he transformed everything: body, mindset, habits. From the outside, he looked unstoppable. But one night over coffee, he admitted, "I'm not really over her. I just want her to scroll through my page and miss me." That's not healing. That's revenge dressed as self-improvement. True growth doesn't say, "Look what you missed." It says, "Look who I became, and I don't need you to notice." Because here's the hard truth: she might never regret it. She might move on, never look back, never know who you became. And if your strength was built on the hope of her recognition, it will crumble when that moment never comes. Here's the lesson: heal for peace, not proof. Choose progress because you deserve it, not because it might echo in someone else's chest. Because the day you no longer crave her validation, not even a little, is the day you become untouchable. So what do you do with that lingering hope? You honor it. You see it for what it is, a part of your process. But then you let it go. Not because she's not worth remembering, but because you are worth releasing. And once you do, you'll feel something shift, not just in how you see her, but in how you see yourself. Which brings us to a truth few men want to face sometimes. The strength we show on the outside is hiding a war we're still fighting within. Let's talk about that next. There's a version of strength that gets celebrated a lot online. The cold stare, the sharp caption, the vibe of "I'm better without you." And it looks powerful until you realize it's not strength at all. It's ego dressed up in silence. You see, true strength doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to be seen, validated, or applauded. But ego thrives on attention. And after heartbreak, it whispers things like, "Show her what she lost, make her regret it. You win if she comes crawling back." The problem is ego doesn't heal, it performs. I knew a man named Tyler. After his breakup, he went full alpha mode. Unfollowed, blocked, Started posting stories with new women, quotes about loyalty and playlists filled with anger. Everyone said, "Damn, he's bouncing back strong." But behind closed doors, Tyler was exhausted, because pretending not to care is its own kind of prison. He told me I wanted her to feel the pain I felt. I thought if I looked stronger, I'd feel stronger. But he didn't, because revenge, even silent revenge, doesn't heal grief. It just delays it. Here's what makes ego so tricky. It convinces you that protecting your pride is the same as protecting your peace. But they're not the same. Peace is quiet confidence. Pride is noisy insecurity. Real power is when you can sit in your pain without trying to transfer it. When you can feel the ache and still choose not to lash out. When you can be hurt and still move with grace. Here's the lesson: you don't need to get even. You need to get honest. Ask yourself, is your silence calm or calculated? Is your detachment authentic or a disguise for anger? Are you posting for growth or for reaction? It's okay if you've fallen into that trap. We all do at some point, but healing begins when you're brave enough to drop the performance and sit with what's really there. Because beneath the ego is grief, and beneath the grief is freedom. And that freedom, real, lasting, grounded freedom, only comes when you turn inward, not outward. When you stop trying to prove and start trying to build. Which brings us to the turning point. What if you could take all this pain, all this fire, and use it for something greater? That's exactly where we're heading next. Heartbreak brings heat. Not just the ache in your chest, but the restless energy in your hands, the late-night spirals, the urge to do something, anything, just to feel in control again. And that energy, it can destroy you or build you. The choice is in how you use it. You see, emotional pain, when left unprocessed, becomes poison. But when it's acknowledged, when it's channeled, it becomes fuel. Fuel to create, to step into the next version of yourself, not because you're running from pain, but because you've chosen to work with it. I remember a man named Jay. After his girlfriend ended things without warning, he was wrecked. Couldn't eat, couldn't focus. He was spiraling. One night, instead of texting her again, he did something different. He opened a blank document and wrote everything he felt, every memory, every regret, every moment he wished he could redo. Then he kept writing the next day, and the next. That journal turned into a blog. That blog turned into a platform for helping other men navigate breakups. And the irony, the woman who once ignored him, ended up reading his words and reaching out. But by then, he no longer needed her to understand. He had transformed the pain into purpose. That's the power of rechanneling. Whether it's writing, working out, starting a business, picking up a creative skill, what matters isn't the medium. It's the intention behind the motion, not to prove, not to impress, but to heal, to express, to rise. Here's the lesson: use the fire or it'll burn you. You already have the energy. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, it's all fuel waiting for a direction. So give it one. Turn your focus from what you lost to what you're about to build. Because something happens when a man begins creating instead of chasing. He stops looking backward. He stops needing validation. He starts becoming magnetic. Not because he's trying to be seen, but because he's too focused to care. And that's where your frame begins to solidify. That's when the world starts responding differently to you. But before that shift can hold, you need to ask yourself a hard question. Do you still respect yourself when no one else is watching? That's where we're going next. There's a moment that comes after the dust settles, after the silence stretches, after the texts stop, after the anger fades. It's quiet. Still, no one is watching. No one is checking in. And in that stillness, one question echoes louder than all the rest: do I still respect myself? Even now. You see, it's easy to look strong when you're in motion, when you're building, posting, growing, achieving. But the real test, the invisible test, happens in the quiet, when there's no audience, no applause, no likes to validate your progress. That's when you find out who you really are. Because self-respect isn't about grand gestures. It's about small choices you make when no one's watching. It's in how you talk to yourself after a bad day, in whether you break your own boundaries when you're lonely, in whether you reach for your old habits or hold the line. I knew a guy named Raman. After a hard breakup, he committed to healing. Therapy, journaling, working out, he was on track. But one night, alone and tired, she texted. Nothing deep, just a "Hey, hope you're well." And in that moment, everything inside him wanted to respond, to feel seen again, to feel wanted. But then he asked himself, would replying honor the man I'm becoming or betray the one I was trying to leave behind? He didn't reply, not out of spite, but out of respect, for the boundaries he had rebuilt, for the pain he had processed, for the promise he made to himself in the dark. Here's the truth. Every time you choose yourself quietly, you get louder in the world. Because people can feel the integrity of a man who isn't shaped by desperation. A man who doesn't fold just because comfort knocks on the door wearing a familiar face. Here's the lesson: don't just aim to be respected by others. Aim to be someone you respect, even when no one's watching. Especially then. Because if you can hold your line when it's hardest, when the emotions roar, when the past taps gently, then you've passed a test most never even see coming. And once you've passed that test, something beautiful starts to happen. You begin to raise your standards, not from bitterness, but from clarity. And that clarity, that's what we're going to unpack next. Because now it's time to redefine what kind of love you'll allow into your life ever again. At some point in the healing process, something shifts. You stop asking, did she leave? And you start asking, what have I been allowing? It's a quiet, powerful pivot, not rooted in blame, but in ownership. Because every relationship, no matter how it ends, leaves you with two things: a scar and a standard. And what you do with both will shape the love you invite next. Too often, we walk away from pain promising never to feel that way again, but without deciding how we'll protect ourselves differently. We carry wounds but forget to create new boundaries. I once met a man named Ely. After being in a relationship where he constantly overgave, always adjusting, always explaining, always chasing emotional safety, he finally reached his breaking point. When it ended, he didn't just cry it out or write a never again post. He sat down, opened a notebook, and wrote something different: my new standards. Simple things, but powerful. I won't chase clarity that should be freely given. I won't accept love that confuses me more than it comforts me. I won't ignore my own needs just to keep someone from walking away. He didn't write it to get revenge. He wrote it to remember who he was and who he was becoming. And when the next relationship came along, something was different. He didn't hesitate to speak up. He didn't shrink when boundaries were tested. He didn't confuse chemistry with commitment. That list, born from a scar, had become his standard. Here's the lesson: pain isn't wasted if it teaches you how to love better, starting with yourself. You don't need to become harder. You need to become clearer. Because clarity attracts peace. And when you're clear about what you will and won't accept, you stop entertaining chaos that once felt familiar. You no longer chase the high of being chosen. You choose you first and invite only those who meet you there. So if you haven't already, write your own standard. Not a checklist of what someone else must be, but a commitment to who you refuse to stop being again. Because once your love is no longer a negotiation, but a reflection of deep self-awareness, you become someone who no longer fears being alone, because your solitude is finally rooted in truth. And from that place, something deeper awakens. You begin to realize the real battle was never between you and her, but between you and the version of you who used to settle. Let's talk about that next. We often think the battle is between us and the one who left. That if she'd just stayed, just communicated better, just chosen us, we'd be fine. But the deeper you go into healing, the more you realize something uncomfortable but freeing. She was never the real enemy. The real battle was internal. Between the man you are and the version of you who settled. The version who tolerated mixed signals just to feel wanted. Who over-explained his worth instead of standing in it. Who stayed quiet when things felt off hoping love would magically fix itself. We've all been him, and that's okay until it's not. Because at some point you have to decide, will I keep betraying myself just to avoid being alone? I remember a man named Chris. He was dependable, generous, deeply loyal. But in his last relationship, he bent so far backward just to keep things good, he forgot what it felt like to stand tall. He stopped sharing how he really felt, laughed off red flags, made excuses when his friends voiced concern. When it ended, he said something that stuck with me: I don't regret losing her. I regret how long I abandoned myself just to keep her around. That was his turning point. See, there's a version of every man that's built on fear, fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of never being loved again. And that version will accept crumbs. That version will mistake attention for affection. That version will keep the peace by losing his voice. But there's another version, the one inside you right now, who's slowly waking up. The one who says no more shrinking, no more proving, no more staying in spaces where you have to earn your place daily. Here's the lesson: healing isn't just letting her go. It's letting him go, the version of you who settled. Because when you release him, you create space for the man you were always meant to be: confident, centered, unapologetically whole. And from that place, something beautiful begins to happen. You no longer hope she sees your worth. You no longer chase closure. Instead, you realize something much more powerful, that becoming untouchable isn't about pushing people away. It's about becoming a man who no longer needs to be held together by someone else. And that is what we'll explore next. There's a certain kind of man people don't forget. Not because he was loud or dramatic or constantly visible, but because he was centered, steady, grounded in who he was, regardless of who stayed or left. That man, he's not untouchable because he's closed off. He's untouchable because he's no longer seeking permission to feel whole. And that's the real transformation. You don't become untouchable by ignoring your emotions. You become untouchable by owning them, by doing the work, facing the silence, building your foundation from within. It's the opposite of what many people think. They imagine the strong man as one who hides his feelings, who stays stone-faced and unfazed. But real strength, it's soft on the inside, solid on the outside. It's the quiet confidence that says, I've seen myself at my lowest, and I still chose to rise. I remember a guy named Malik. After a long, emotionally draining relationship ended, he didn't jump back into dating, didn't post a highlight reel of his new life. He got quiet, started journaling daily, learned to cook for himself, took up long walks at sunset just to be alone with his thoughts. People thought he was isolating, but he was reinforcing, brick by brick, value by value. He was building a life that wasn't reliant on someone else's affection to feel meaningful. Months later, his ex reached out, not because he posted something flashy, but because she could feel the shift not on her screen, but in her gut. That's the paradox. The less you chase validation, the more magnetic you become. But by then, Malik wasn't waiting, he wasn't angry. He just didn't need her anymore. And that's what made him untouchable. Not because he was unreachable, but because he had reached himself. Here's the lesson: real power is quiet. Real confidence is still. Real self-worth doesn't announce itself, it simply lives. You don't heal to impress her. You heal so that if she ever returns, you're not the same man who once needed her to stay. And that man, the one who stands tall on his own, doesn't just attract love, he redefines it. Which brings us to the final, most important step now that you've let go of the pain, the past, and the performance. How will you love moving forward without ever losing yourself again? Let's talk about that next. After all the silence, the reflection, the rebuilding, you reach a quiet clearing. The storm is over, and now you're standing in the open, facing the most important question of all. How do I love again without losing myself this time? Because here's the truth, it's not enough to heal from a broken relationship. You have to rewrite the way you relate, the way you give, the way you show up, and most importantly, the way you protect your own heart without closing it. This is where your new code begins. Not rules for others, not conditions for love, but standards for yourself, drawn from everything you've learned and everything you refuse to forget. I once met a man named Leo, kind, generous, always giving the benefit of the doubt. But after years of being in relationships where he constantly gave more than he received, he sat down and wrote a letter. Not to his ex, not to his future partner, but to himself. It wasn't long, just a list of reminders. I will not explain my worth. I will not confuse chaos for chemistry. I will not shrink to keep the peace. I will not love in a way that requires me to disappear. That list became his compass, and when love came again, he didn't hold back, but he didn't bend either. He loved fully, but this time with boundaries made of self-awareness, not fear. And here's what's beautiful about a man who creates a code from his healing. He doesn't push love away, he filters it. Not every connection gets access. Not every spark gets a seat at the table. Because now, he's not looking for someone to complete him. He's looking for someone to walk beside him, both people whole, both people seen. Here's the lesson: write your code, live by it quietly. Let it shape not only who you accept, but who you become. Because the man who knows his code never begs for respect. He simply lives in a way that commands it. And if she comes back, you'll know if her presence aligns with your path, or if she was just part of the journey that led you here. This isn't about forgetting her. It's about finally remembering you. And if you've made it this far, then you've done something most never do. You didn't just survive heartbreak. You transformed through it. So here's your next step: live this truth. Share it. Stand in it. And when love comes again, because it will, meet it not as the man who was hurt, but as the man who healed. The man who now walks, not to prove anything to anyone, but because he finally remembers where he's going. And that's the kind of man no one ever forgets.